A very warm welcome to the penultimate session of Learning Technology Autumn Forum 2023. I am Gail. I will be chairing these sessions and I'm very excited about it. Before we get started, can I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat? Feel free to tell us what you've learned, what you're excited about, what you're going to apply, and maybe it's an opportunity to reflect and discuss and observe what others have taken away from this very, very exciting forum. I wonder if you've noticed, but we've talked a lot this year about AI, which is great. For me, AI was just ChatGPT and a couple of other tools, playing up a little bit, creating text. But after since last week, I've totally changed my mind, and the potential has just blown me up. And I'm really thinking about all the potential, all the way of improving the way I work that I could leverage AI for. But this session is about people and not about AI, or isn't it? Being able to understand learners' needs, context, is key. It's key for your own clarity, our own clarities for strategy purposes, but it's also key to ask the right prompts and questions to your AI assistant. Creating the best learning experience is often about creating the most personalized ones. And it is a real delight for me to welcome today Beth Chudley, who is a learning experience consultant with Sponge. She's particularly passionate about human-centered design and impact. In 4 years in the industry, Beth has contributed to a large range of projects for various industries and topics, and one of which has won an award. Beth is also one of the 30 under 30 group for this year. It is a high potential group of young professionals who is supported by learning technology to support them in their making contact, create a network, and help them become the L&D leaders of tomorrow. Hello, Beth. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Gail. Thank you so much for that introduction.
While you're getting ready, just a quick reminder to our participants that you can post as many comments in the chat, but try to post your questions in the question tab. It's just a little bit easier for me. And also everybody can like the questions, and unsurprisingly, I will pick up the one with the most liked at the beginning of the Q&A in the last 10 minutes of your sessions, Beth. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gail. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And I hope you've enjoyed the forum so far. I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you so much for joining me. As Gail said, my name is Beth Chudley. I'm a learning experience consultant at Sponge, and essentially my role involves partnering with global brands to support them in creating their learning strategy, executing on that, and also designing learning programs. But that's enough about me, because today we're really here to talk about 2030. And it feels ambitious, but I think ultimately what I want to do today is provide a bit of a glimpse into what the future could look like, but importantly focus on how that should inform what we're doing right now. So I'm sure 2030 will feel like it's here in no time. We've got 7 years to go. And we will get started by actually just looking backwards. So when I first started reflecting on what the portrait of a learner could look like in 2030, I ultimately had to look backwards, and I started to reflect on the last decade. And I think we only have to consider the last 3.5 years to think what's happened. A pandemic, ChatGPT, Donald Trump. And just looking at those things, I think it's clear to say that we know that things can change. They can change quickly, and they can change in very unexpected ways. So when I was reflecting on this, and reflecting more specifically on what a learner could look like in 2030, I ultimately found myself going down lots of different avenues. And been quite overwhelmed, to be completely honest with you. And when I started conducting research on this topic specifically and reading around on what other people's perspectives were on this, I felt that I was quite rightly uncertain, and that people were almost as uncertain as I was. And I just wanted to bring up some of the research and quotes that I discovered throughout that time. So the first quote I just want to draw your attention to is a piece of research conducted by PwC in 2018. And I think this quote just really stood out to me. "No exploration of the future of work will ever be conclusive. Indeed, one of the defining characteristics of our age is its ability to surprise and confound." And I think that ultimately really resonated with me and was similarly backed up by a piece of research from McKinsey. Again, we draw from lessons from history and develop various scenarios for the future. And while it is hard to predict how all this will play out, our research provides some insights into the likely workforce transitions that should be expected and their implications. So, what I found whilst conducting this research is ultimately, whilst we can't be sure, we can learn from history, we can learn from trends that are emerging right now. Um, and broadly, a lot of the research I saw largely agreed on some of the key forces that will influence the world of work, including technology, demographics, and this changing relationship between employees and employers. I also think that even over the last couple of years, the focus on skills as opposed to job roles are rapidly changing. And I think that pace of change will ultimately continue to accelerate. So, nothing concrete as to what 2030 will look like, or more specifically, what a learner in 2030 will look like. But what I wanted to do is really think about what that research and what current trends that we're seeing in the industry, how can that provide that glimpse into the future where we can start to predict what a learner of 2030 might look like? Now, please don't message me in 7 years if I have this completely wrong. But there are a few things I wanted to touch upon before we dive into the workforce learning strategy that we can be working on today to support this learner of 2030. And the first piece I wanted to touch upon is I really see learners wanting more control. And again, this is a trend that I think has absolutely been emerging the last couple of years. We hear this term self-directed learning, and I think ultimately that's a position where we want to be aiming for, but I'm also very conscious of the pitfalls of self-directed learning and how learners need the right level of guidance in order to know where to start, to where to direct themselves, and where to take control in their learning and development focus. And I started to think about this in the context of analytics and measurement. Again, another trend which I think has really um, brought a lot of focus in the industry over the last few years. Just earlier this year in May, when I attended Learning Technologies, I attended a talk by Red Thread Research stating that analytics and measurement was the primary focus for the majority of learning tech providers. Now, I find that data is usually put into the perspective of how it can support organizations in reporting on their ROI, in how they're achieving KPIs, in getting buy-in from senior stakeholders, for example. But I actually think as the industry matures with data and how organizations kind of go on that data journey, we may start to see data becoming more of a transparent topic. And it can actually play into how learners access more control when it comes to their learning and development, how they might use data to support whether they want buy-in for formal training, for example. I think it's an interesting two trends that may combine in the future. More accessible. So I think as Gail introduced the session, the topic of AI, more than ever now, we have answers at our fingertips. Just the other day, I rang my great auntie, who is 86 years old, and I explained that since moving into our new house, I haven't quite worked out how to set the central heating timer on the new boiler. And she says to me, Beth, Google it. There's some great videos on YouTube. You'll be able to find the answer. And I thought, you're right. Thank you, Auntie Jean. I will do that. So already we kind of seek for answers in the moment of need. And I think the introduction of tools like ChatGPT will only enable us to have more focused answers as and when we need them. And we need to be aware of that when we're thinking about how we approach supporting our learners in 2030. If that content is readily available for them, how is what we're doing as learning development professionals adding value to that and ultimately supporting them in their personal wider goals? Skills focused. So a couple of statistics here and research and experiences that I think back this trend up. A study by the World Economic Forum found that 65% of jobs that will exist in 2030 do not yet exist. So when we think about what we're doing now and how we prepare for a portrait of a learner in 2030, we have to be aware that a lot of the jobs that people will be doing aren't yet there. So when we're thinking about preparing ourselves for that, and importantly preparing our strategies for that, we have to be conscious that things are going to change. And this was ultimately supported by a talk at Learning Technologies with keynote speaker Robin Teagland, who introduced the jobs of the future. And there was, I think, a list of 10. And there are a few that stuck out to me, one of those being a robot personality designer. I think an old fluencer was on there as well, which sounds intriguing. And also an AI prompter, which I think even the last few months has probably become a job already. So ultimately, I think skills are going to become more of a focus in order to prepare people to adapt to those situations. And then finally, higher expectations. So with the advancement in tech, with AI being available, with content being more available, learners will be expecting more from learning and development teams. And ultimately, I think bringing more of this together to produce a better experience for them. So just a bit of a glimpse into the learner of 2030, and apologies, I realised my slide hadn't moved on there, sorry about that. But when we think about some of those trends and what we can predict for 2030, I think something that's probably come through in the last few minutes of me talking is that we can't be certain of what the learner will look like in 2030, or even what the workplace learning environment will look like in 2030. But what I can be certain of is that we need to be prepared for a world in which we can't predict. And in order to do that, we should be preparing in the same way that we've been preparing since the 1950s, for example. And whilst the world is changing quickly, it's always changed quickly in the past. So that rapid change isn't something new. And how humans learn hasn't fundamentally changed. It's just what we need to learn that is different. So throughout today's session, we're going to be exploring how we should build the workforce of 2030 by leveraging, and I mean like truly leveraging, what we already know is effective when it comes to building that workforce capability. So that's broadly what we're going to be discussing today, what the foundational blocks of an effective workforce learning strategy should be, with some observations on how that sets us up for 2030 and throughout. And what that should do is set us up to be adaptable, to be ready to respond to change. So we will make a start by exploring the foundations of an effective workforce learning strategy. And I think ultimately, for me, it leverages the best of what we know about workforce learning and behaviour. It understands the value of an organisational learning culture, and it seeks to strengthen that as well. It seeks to deeply understand the audiences it serves, and I think that connects really nicely to what Gail was talking about in her introduction around how ultimately we are going to achieve that level of personalisation that people really need. We need to be focused on humans, which is we are ultimately trying to support. It also aims to solve the organisation's most valuable problems, and it's rigorous in measuring its effectiveness to do so. So we'll dive into that a little bit more with business alignment and measuring effectiveness. And finally, it's empowered by technology, but it's not a slave to trends. So there are 6 ingredients there that we are going to explore. But I wondered if we could just pause for a second and run a bit of a poll on these 6 ingredients. So Gail, I'm not sure if you are able to support me with this
Yes,
one. Thank you.
brilliant. So, excellent. So we've got a poll that Beth and I would like you to complete. So if you have found the chat on the right-hand side of your screen, you open it, and then you've got 3 tabs. So you've got the chat, where you've got a very lively stream of comments. Then you've got the questions, and then you've got the poll. So if you want to click on the poll, you will see a question, which is, which of the following do you think should be a current focus for your organizations? So you've got a choice of 6 options: workforce, learning and behavior, the first one, and then all the way down to technology is the last one. And how many do you think the participants should be selecting? Oh, maximum, because they could click all of them, right?
Absolutely, Gail. So I would challenge you to maybe pick your top 2, and I think it will be very personal to your specific organisation. So there's no right or wrong answer here. I think it's ultimately, I think, we want to get the perfect balance of all of these. But right now, do you have a priority in your organisation? And we're going to be diving into these in a bit more detail as well.
Which is lovely. We're starting to see quite a lot of feedbacks coming in, Beth. So we're going to just give it another maybe 10 seconds in case someone is still scratching their head and maybe tossing a coin to decide which ones are at the top of their priorities. But I think we can start already seeing a trend. So
Fantastic. I'm interested to
here we
hear.
go. Here we go. So, well, ooh, that's an interesting spread, actually. So, with 24%, the workforce learning and behavior comes at the top. And
Interesting.
then we've got 20% for organizational learning cultures. Oh, things are shifting in the following 3 now. It keeps shifting between now measuring effectiveness has just overcome human-centered design and business alignment. And last, technology. And it seems to be
Interesting.
pretty much settled now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gail. That's really interesting insights for sure. And what we're going to do is ask you to revisit that poll at the end of the session. So really, really interesting to see if that has shifted once we kind of dive into these a bit deeper now.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, then. So we will get started with diving a bit deeper into workforce learning and behaviour. So interesting that this one kind of came out on top of the poll. And I'm looking forward to kind of discussing this with you today, because I think when it comes to learning and behavioural sciences, it's such a vast field. But I really wanted to touch upon this today because I think whilst they can be considered quite different, the kind of learning science and behavioral science, I think ultimately when we talk about learning and performance in an organization, we're ultimately talking about influencing behavior in some way. And I'd probably go as far to say that learning to do something differently, whilst it's a critical subcomponent of behaving differently, I wouldn't kind of put that at an equivalent level. So, as I said, whilst it's quite a vast field, and I can't equip you with that deep understanding today, what I really want to do in this next, over these next few slides is just kind of reframe some of the learning problems that you might be coming up against in your organization and just prompt some alternative thinking about how you might tackle them and how that might set you up for 2030. Now, I wanted to start by talking about the COM-B model. Now, the COM-B model is a popular behavioral science model, and it was coined by a world-renowned team at University College of London led by Susan Mishi. And it argues that new behavior requires three things: the capability to do something differently, the opportunity to do something differently, and the motivation to do something differently. So we're going to bring this to life with an example. And I want to ask you to imagine that we have a goal to improve the quality and the quantity of feedback given and received in an organization. So the COM-B model would suggest that in order to do that, we need the capability to give and receive feedback. So that, for example, we need to know how to do it. And if we want improved quality, we need to know what good looks like. The opportunity to give and receive feedback. So, for example, we need the time to do it. And it also must be something that's socially acceptable in the organization. So it feels like it's a norm, for example. And we also need the motivation to give and receive feedback. So we need to want to give that feedback, or we need to see the value in it, or we're incentivized to do so. And the reason I touch upon the COM-B model is it's useful for a variety of reasons. It can really help us think through what the most common obstacles to a behavior might be. For example, people might know how to give feedback, but they might not see the value in it. So in this case, we're experiencing a motivation one, not a capability one. It also illustrates that capability is probably what we would traditionally view as a barrier to learning, or what we would traditionally focus on as trying to achieve a behavior. And whilst I'm saying that capability shouldn't not be a focus of learning, I think there are other intervention types that the COM-B kind of prompts us to think about to ensure that ultimately a behavior is achieved. So I think with the COM-B model, ultimately it forces us to recognize that in order to be truly effective with our learning interventions, we need to be going beyond our traditional learning approaches and instead adopt what's commonly known as kind of performance consulting approaches, understanding what the desired behavior is and removing the obstacles to achieving that behavior. And that should be regardless of whether they are kind of our learning problems per se associated with that capability piece. So this is a very light introduction to COM-B, and I encourage kind of further research around it because I think it does really prompt us as learning development professionals to identify what the obstacle to a behavior is and how we can target and tailor our interventions to achieve that. But of course, sometimes we do come up against a learning problem, so a capability problem that we need to focus on. And what does best practice look like for how we tackle those? Well, if you were to look across our industry, I would say there are kind of two approaches that our minds might go straight towards. One is we put people in a room together and we show them some slides and we talk it through. The second may be to create some content, whether that's e-learning modules, videos, articles, and then perhaps brought together in some kind of pathway. But is that really how we learn to do something? Now, there's a lot of learning science out there, and I think we probably all have our favorite framework or theory that we refer to. But I'm just going to ask you to pause for a second and reflect on what your most powerful learning experience was. Now, I imagine lots of different things are coming to your mind right now. And whilst they all might be different with different contexts, different goals, I imagine you had different levels of capability at that time. I think I could be confident in saying the three parts to that learning experience would have been a motivation to learn, i.e., you wanted to learn it. Think back to me trying to work out my central heating timing the other day. I had you'd have a degree of instruction, i.e., someone kind of explaining that to you or seeking information. And then I imagine there would have involved practice, a lot of practice with feedback over time. And that feedback could be that something works, or it could be that someone's giving you that feedback with something to improve on. Now, mixed in with all three would ideally be some elements of personalization, probably more focused on a capability level or within certain context. But I'd be confident in saying that all three were there. Now, I'd argue that traditionally, our default approaches when it comes to supporting our learners is that we over index on point 2. So we over deliver on that instruction piece, and we ultimately under index on points 1 and 3. Now, I'm going to revisit the concept of motivation a little later on. So for now, I'm just going to focus on points 2 and 3. Now, I just want to kind of demonstrate that visual shift there, because whilst we probably do over index on instruction, I'd argue that instruction does not equal learning, or it definitely doesn't equal doing anything differently. So to enable people to do things differently, we ultimately cannot ignore the need to practice doing that task or that skill over and over again. Now, the complexity of that may change, and how many times they need to do that might change as well. But as an industry, I think we need to be focusing our attention away from instruction and towards practice. And if you think back to that scenario of giving more high quality feedback, we'd have to uncover how we might motivate people to learn about giving feedback. So that was kind of our problem that we'd identified, or the obstacle to the behavior that we'd identified. Now, if we think about focusing on motivation a bit later on, we'd give them as little as instruction as we could get away with. So maybe a framework to follow or a video of someone putting that into action. But then we'd create the opportunity for them to practice. And that should be in an authentic way. And that also might start by providing a safe space for them to practice. For example, within a video simulation where they get feedback, that might then progress to kind of role playing with a colleague and that bit more out of their comfort zone, to then actually giving it a go and asking for feedback on giving feedback, which can get quite complicated. So to round our section on workforce learning and behaviour off, I just want to play back what the kind of bedrock of our practice should be when it comes to learning, supporting kind of workforce learning and behaviour. So firstly, we need to recognise that behaviour has so many influences, and the capability to do something is just one element of that. We need to work to better understand and unblock all obstacles to a behavior. So sometimes that might be thinking back to COMBI, the opportunity, the motivation, or the capability, but not just those related to learning. And when obstacles are related to learning, we need to be designing for behavior and practice, not just the instruction piece. And what does this mean for 2030? Well, I think when we think back to kind of the jobs that people will be doing in 2030, the skills that will be required, the things we're asking people to do are becoming more complex, more niched. I think conversely to that, technology is going to enable us to do more. But ultimately, the fundamental principles of seeking to understand what's influencing a behavior, what those obstacles are to a behavior, and designing for experience over instruction still stand and will still be as essential in that 2030 picture as it is in the current day. Okay, moving on then to organizational learning culture. And I think this is something that is going to play a key role as we move to 2030 and think about how quickly things are changing, how the context of things may change quickly as well. Now, if we think about workforce learning and behavior as how we influence individuals in relatively narrow contexts, for example, we might have one specific thing that we're focused on, like giving like improving the quantity and quality of feedback. Organizational learning culture, I would say, is more broad. It's a lever we can pull to more broadly influence how people behave in a wide range of contexts. And this is key because this may be things that we can't predict or design for, but it's still important to prepare people in how to respond to those moments in a world where we almost can't respond as quickly with something with a training program, for example, for that specific need. So there are two lenses in which we can think about organizational learning culture. And I think I just wanted to start by acknowledging I don't think we can underestimate how challenging it can be to articulate how a culture is currently working, or what kind of learning culture you have currently. But that's kind of our first challenge. But then to be able to design solutions that influence that culture is almost our second challenge. Now, we're going to go on to talk about human centered design and measuring effectiveness, which can also influence organizational learning culture. But I think, firstly, thinking about these two different lenses um, is going to be helpful in kind of considering that articulation of a learning culture, the articulation of where you want to be, and then designing solutions that's going to support you on that journey. So the two lenses are how does that culture support learning on an individual basis? So how does that culture support your learners that you're designing for? And then how does it support learning on a team basis? So looking more within the environment in which someone, or within the network in which someone performs their role. So we'll start then with the individual level. And just some prompting questions here that I think we can be asking ourselves when we think about that articulation of the learning culture and how we want to influence it. So um, at an individual level, we should be thinking about things like how do we encourage individuals to select a focus for their learning? And I think this comes back to that piece around in 2030 learners having more control, more access to learning. It's almost like we need to support them in providing that structure, that enough guidance to strike that balance between um, having that self-directed experience, but also supporting them in working towards a goal and something that's ultimately going to benefit them. How do we encourage individuals to reflect on their progress in that area? And again, I think this could tie into potentially data and measurement becoming more transparent as the industry matures on that topic. How do managers support this selection and reflection process? So I think managers playing a key role in setting the expectations for learning and development within their team. And what organizational infrastructure is in place to support this? So, for example, is there time for that reflection to happen? Is there time for people to think about their progress or their goals or how those goals might shift as they progress? Is there a mentoring and coaching system? What does that look like and how effective is that? And is it consistent? I think something we come up across a lot is there are pockets of excellent kind of mentoring or coaching going on, but it's not always happening in a consistent way. And how do we give people new experiences through things like secondments, job shadowing, assignments? So thinking about that practice and experiential piece in the workforce learning behaviour is absolutely something that plays a role in that organisational learning culture piece as well. And finally, how do we make learning central to processes like annual performance reviews? So thinking again to that data and measurement piece, how can we bring value to learners, and instill that learning culture that we're striving for, and ultimately is going to support learners in responding to needs that they may not know they have right now. And then when we think about the team level learning culture, I wanted to draw your attention to some work from Adam Grant in his recent book, Think Again. Now, in this book, Adam makes the argument that being able to challenge our own beliefs and ways of thinking is ultimately critical to success. And he makes the argument that this is critical to the success of an organization. It's an organizational superpower. Now, we've already talked about how adaptability feels like the one thing that we know we need for the future, and ultimately characterizes the future. And in Adam's book, there's a chapter where he talks about how organizations can build this capacity for adaptability, ultimately for kind of strategizing about how to do things differently. Now, the key reframe that he proposes is that organizations should disassociate the process of decision making from the outcomes of those decisions. So, for example, we could make the right decision, but be rewarded with a terrible outcome, which is why Adam argues that we need to subject our team decision making, regardless of whether that outcome was good or bad, to a more rigorous review. And how we might do that. So, as a team, or from a team level perspective, we need to be asking ourselves how our learning culture allows us to reflect. So, do we have that psychologically safe, blame free environment on the performance of a team together? How do we capture those lessons, and what do we do with them? What mechanisms do we have in place to review practices and decisions as they are happening? And I think we just need to be aware that there are only so many kind of specific problems, like improving the quantity and quality of feedback, and solutions in order to respond to that, that we can focus on as learning professionals, as learning development teams. So having that robust and effective learning culture is going to be incredibly powerful when we think about preparing the workforce for 2030 and the amount of change that's to come. Okay, whizzing on then to human-centered design. So far we've talked about kind of how learning and behavioral science can support us in solving specific problems, and then how an effective organizational learning culture can have more of that scalable impact where we don't have the capacity to respond to specific problems. But human-centered design is something, as Gail said, I'm particularly passionate about, because I think ultimately one of our predominant goals is to support humans in their learning. And I think human-centered design is a tool that we can use to, when we're thinking about those interventions and solutions and how we drive a specific learning culture, human-centered design maximizes the impact that those elements can have. And when we talk about human-centered design, I think we don't want to overcomplicate this. Um, I think there are lots of different definitions of human-centered design. There's lots of research behind it, but ultimately, I think it doesn't have to be complex. And really, what we're talking about here is just talking to people that we're designing for, responding to the needs that they've articulated, and including them in our work. What does that mean, and how can that help us? And I think this next slide is key in thinking about how, when we do that, there are kind of these four ways in which it can help us respond to quite common learning challenges. And this is that piece I was speaking about earlier around touching upon motivation, spending a bit more time there. So we're going to just touch upon these four areas. So human-centered design can help us in getting people to do it. So again, thinking about that motivation piece. It can help us uncover what the true obstacles to a performance are. So again, thinking about uncovering those obstacles to a specific behavior. Can also help us uncover what good looks like and develop authentic practice moments. And finally, uncover obstacles and impediments to an effective learning culture. So kind of bringing together some of what we've already discussed. But I wanted to start by jumping into getting people to do it. And some of you may know of a learning strategist in our industry, Egil Vineskata. And I highly recommend following her on LinkedIn. She says some really interesting has some really interesting posts and discussions. But she suggests, and ultimately I agree with this, that largely people will do something to either make money, increase their status, gain safety, save time, connect with others, or explore their curiosity. Now, I think by leveraging human-centered design, so for example, just talking to people, we can uncover which of these motivators might be most relevant for us to focus in on during our design. So again, bringing back that feedback example, when we ask people in an organization, how might giving more high quality feedback help them? They might say, well, it might save me time because once I've given that feedback, that person won't make the same mistake. Now, we can start to build some of that thinking into our design, telling a story, introducing it into our narrative to play that back to other people to ensure that they have the motivation to um, to support their goals and ultimately take on that action or that behavior that we're trying to instill. Uncovering what true obstacles to performance uncovering what the true obstacles to performance are. So here we're really asking questions to uncover why someone doesn't do the thing we want them to. So again, we might ask someone why they don't give feedback and they might respond, well, nobody else does. So when we think about the COM-B model, that would suggest that that's an opportunity issue. It's not the done thing. It's not the done thing in the organization. So here we would really need to focus on our attention on making it feel like the done thing. We might encourage managers to role model this or give feedback more frequently or design a comms campaign to prompt that and really bring it to the surface. Uncovering what good looks like. So here we're really trying to ask questions to highlight either someone who is good at this and then may be able to role model or explain how they got good at that skill. And then we can look to emulate that or communicate and provide people the opportunity to practice that as well. And then finally, uncovering obstacles and impediments to a learning culture. So asking people questions like, what are you learning now at work? What was the last thing you learned? How do you learn something? Um, and what obstacles do you face? What are the barriers to you learning these things? And I know sometimes talking to people can feel like a big task, but I think even speaking to 30 people and asking these questions, that will give you enough of an insight to start putting things into action. Um, and I think just finally on human-centered design, it can help us at every stage of that learning design process. So there's no need to stop at that discovery phase. Bring people in as we go through that design and development stage as well. Okay, then moving on to business alignment. Now, I think probably every one of us on this call have experienced someone coming to us and asking for training on a specific topic. And I think I imagine, learning development professionals, we're inundated with training requests. And sometimes it feels the simplest way to respond to that with training. But I think there's an opportunity to be really aligned with the business and ultimately get close to what it is the business is trying to achieve and how, if at all, training can support that. Now, I want to bring your attention to somebody else in the industry, and I just think it's worth kind of playing back this whole post. So this is a great post on LinkedIn by Sam Allen, and I just want to actually repeat it in its entirety because I think it sparked some really interesting thought, and ultimately he says to talk to the business about the business, not about L&D. We often get stuck with stakeholders talking about training and compliance numbers, not because we want to, not because they want to, but because they think we want to. So shift the conversation, be eternally curious about their business, ask about metrics and measures that you don't understand, and ask about how they are doing with delivering their strategic priorities, how these are shifting, what they're most worried about. Trust me, real meaningful performance-related L&D needs will come out of these conversations. This is just one way we can shift from order taker to strategic partner in L&D. So I'd encourage you to start having those conversations and challenging people within the business with those questions. But this ultimately ties really nicely to our next section around measuring effectiveness. And I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to dive into this one because there are ultimately a range of frameworks and models to support us in measuring effectiveness, and everyone has their favorite, and I think everyone has their opinions on certain models as well. But whether you're a disciple of Kirkpatrick model or you're a fan of Will Thalheimer's L10 model, broadly a lot of the evaluation models in the industry kind of have this hierarchy of effectiveness that we want to explore when it comes to learning. So at the bottom, we have things like, did anyone do it? Did they like it? At the top, we have things like, did we change a number? Then in the middle, we kind of have this question around, are people doing anything differently? And I'd argue that the least useful kind of measurement at the bottom is the easiest to capture. And the top, as we kind of get to the top, although more useful, it's harder for us to measure. Now, I wanted to think about some strategies to kind of support you in the measuring effectiveness, and I strongly suggest kind of if you haven't heard of Kevin Yates, otherwise known as the L&D detective. I'm a big fan of Kevin, and I think something I wanted to draw your attention to is his analogy of using of the rocket. So ultimately, he asks us to think about the fulfillment of purpose. And I think we know sometimes it is hard to measure the effectiveness of things, but if we're clear on what the purpose of something should be, it can really support us in telling that story and referring back to whether we've succeeded. So Kevin's analogy is, a team launch a rocket into space. They build it, they launch it, and then they wonder, well, what success have we achieved? Is it that it got into space? Is it that it reached the moon? Or is it that it made contact with alien life forms? Ultimately, if we haven't set that purpose, what impact we want to have at the start, it's hard for us to measure that success. That also then implicates our design. So, ensuring that we're clear on that at the start will ensure that we're designing something that is fit for purpose. Now, this kind of only works when there is something to track. And I think interestingly, this question is something that can help us in being that challenger. Now, this is a question that Laurie Niles Hoffman advocates for. Is there any data that proves there's a problem? So obviously, if the answer is yes, then that makes measuring impact a whole lot easier. It's something that we can refer back to and see if something has shifted. But if the answer is no, then at least we can move forward with some kind of intervention that we can do it with eyes open, and we may look to collect data along the way. Now, this question, are people doing anything differently? That kind of middle piece in the hierarchy. Again, tricky for us to measure sometimes, but something I would encourage you to start thinking about is using managers and peers. Ask them to report on whether people are doing something differently, and that can be quite a simple way to kind of track change in behavior. And finally, use human-centered design. So I mentioned, we shouldn't just be thinking about human-centered design in those early stages where we uncover those blockers, but ultimately we can start to deploy human-centered design techniques in this space as well. This can sometimes lead to quite more qualitative data, which sometimes can be a bit harder to report on, but it is valuable and can give you insights on how to iterate on your design. So thinking about what you might change, whether you could run a pilot and kind of get this kind of feedback. And asking questions like, would this work? Would you do this? Can give you some valuable insights on whether you need to shift the focus. Okay, moving on to our last section. I'm just conscious we want to leave time for questions at the end. So the final ingredient in that kind of workforce learning strategy, technology empowered. Now I kind of left this to last on purpose, and I was really intrigued that technology was kind of last on the list for people in the poll. I think technology is absolutely a focus in our industry, but I'd argue that we should be using it in a way that empowers what we're doing and is a tool that we can use rather than a focus. So whilst it can be a huge driver of impact, I think it can distract us. And I'm always conscious of how we probably as L&D professionals kind of get excited about the new shiny thing, whether it's AI, whether it's the metaverse, or whether it's kind of VR solutions. So I do think it's important that we touch upon this, but I'm always just conscious of thinking about technology in a way that we can empower success across some of the themes that we've spoken about today, rather than it being so much of a focus on its own. So quickly then, I'm just going to touch upon how technology will help us when we think about some of the kind of themes that we've spoken about today. So learning and behavioral science was kind of the first area we spoke about, the workforce learning and behavior. And I think here technology is going to impact how we design in two ways. We've discussed how a more adaptive and personalized learning experience should be kind of focused more on their current knowledge, the context in which they apply that, and the performance in what they want to achieve in the future. And I think technology will play a huge role here, ultimately providing more of that tailored experience through AI, focusing more on skills and the skills they currently have, and also the skills they want to have in the future. I think will support in that continuous learning space. We also spoke about how practice is key in learning, and how we need to give people that space to practice doing something. And I think technology can really lean into that safe space to practice. So I think as technology progresses, we may start to see more practice environments that support us with tasks that we find quite difficult to practice in the real world, or we need that space to rehearse and get feedback in more of that rehearsal space before we build up the confidence to do that. So I think the key is that these environments will become closer to reality, become more authentic, and ultimately provide more of that opportunity to practice in more of a kind of rehearsal space. And I think I have to comment on ChatGPT here as well. I think we know that large language models is ultimately going to help connect people to content faster, or even help create content faster. Now, I'd argue that this is not a good thing, and actually can uh, what we really need to be focused on here is providing the right context. So I think there's a question there as to how AI will introduce challenges when it comes to that introduction of more content. but less context. And I think that could be where we really add the value there. And then finally, I think measuring effectiveness, there's a real opportunity to start bringing those data sets together. So again, thinking about that hierarchy of measurement, and we've kind of got our lowest level of completion, perception, and then we kind of have our middle layer of, is that impacting behavior, and then our top layer of, is that impacting the business. I think we can start to see in the future technology supporting us in bringing data from L&D to broader kind of HR and performance data, to even kind of broader KPIs and beyond. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry that ran over a bit. I think we've got a bit of time for questions.
Thank you so much, Beth. It was brilliant, and I think we all could have carried on for another 2 hours. Unfortunately, there is the closing sessions coming shortly after the end of our session. So, but I think we've got some very positive comments in the chat. We also have some questions, so that's why I think we want to address them. And we've got. I'm going to start with Edwin, because historically it's the first questions we received. Good questions from Edwin was asked, who is in the best position within an organization to ensure that new behavioral practice is given the correct focus and support?
Sorry, Gail, could you just repeat that question again? I think I
Yes,
missed the start.
yes, I know. So who is in the within the organization, within the best position to ensure that new behavioral practice, so new behavior is given the correct focus and support. So who should be at the heart of the implementation of a new behavior?
Yeah, interesting question. So I think I probably have a interesting answer to that one. For me, I feel like it's the learners. And I think this ties back to kind of that 2030 piece where we're going to see learners taking more control. If and I think with the data piece as well, if learners are able to articulate what their focus should be and where they want to develop their skills, obviously in line with business objectives, but I think as organizations start to be more transparent with the skills that they have and the skills that they need for the future and how they want to support people in transferring those skills, I actually think a lot of that will come from the learners themselves. And I think ultimately we'll be there to support them with that.
That is brilliant. And I wonder if it's what the answer that Edwin had in mind, or any of the
Yeah.
participants. So feel free to comment in the chat. So that is brilliant. And we've got 2 minutes left. So I would like to take Anish question, which asks if every interventions can be measured for effectiveness, and how long the intervention should be to have a measurable impact, referring to moving numbers as a measurement scale. So yes, so do we think that the sessions maybe like today could have like a real impact, like an hour learning? So how do you construct that, Beth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a great question. I think the measuring impact piece is always challenging, and in an ideal world, we'd measure everything. But I think we know that a lot of learning happens on the job when people are kind of within these experiences, which is sometimes hard for us to capture that data or even observe as learning development professionals. So I think, unfortunately, as much as we wish that the measuring effectiveness piece isn't always the case when it comes to every intervention. But I think when I think I definitely think there are opportunities to shift behavior and shift and make an impact in even the smallest of interactions, providing someone with feedback, making a comment, exploring, seeking new information. I think absolutely can have that impact, but I think the challenge is always there with measuring effectiveness.
Thank you so much, Beth. And we've got a last but vital question: is, are you going to share the slides with the participants?
Absolutely, I can do that. And thank you so much, Ron. I'm really sorry I didn't leave time for questions, but please feel free to reach out to me separately.
That is great. We're gonna pop Beth LinkedIn in the chat now, so you can connect with her and ask the questions that we haven't had a chance to answer. I think it was a great reminder that we've got not necessarily a lot of clarity about what the future will be, but we've got best practice, and that technology is a mean to an end, and it's not something we necessarily need to seek after. So I think it was a brilliant way of tying everything we've seen in the past 3-4 days together, remembering what we do is for the learners, and we have to keep them at the heart of everything we do. So thank you so much, Beth. It was brilliant interventions, people from uh, around the world, pretty much. We've got Asia, Africa. We've got a lot of different parts of Europe and America. A lot of attention is drawn onto this topic. So once again, thank you everybody who contributed. Some great questions here, fabulous comments, and some great thinking. And we are going to carry on thinking about it until the next forum coming up in the spring. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.